This is Undaunted.Life, a man's podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Thompson. Let's get into it. Welcome back to the Forging Table. The mission of Undaunted.Life is equipping men to push back darkness with content that forges spiritual, mental, and physical resilience. At the Forging Table, you'll see a group of regular guys forging spiritual resilience by digging into God's Word, and we're welcoming all of you to come along on that journey with us. That's Matt, that's Eric, that's Caleb. But before we dig into Proverbs 1, Caleb, I noticed something before we started recording. Okay.
Let's start with me.
Could you, let's just keep this spot in your Bible. I just want to turn it over and wait a minute. That is your wife's name. Now, I don't know if we're allowed to say her name on this show because we don't need anybody looking her up, but is there a reason why you don't have a Bible? Is this like, is your wife running the spiritualness of your household? Like, help me understand. And then give me my pen back because I use it as a marker inside of there.
This pen's mine.
What's going on?
Mine is missing a lot of pages. You know, it's been through a lot over the years.
When you say missing pages, okay.
From the cult, man, he couldn't read some of it, so he didn't swear it out.
Yeah, for those of you that don't get that joke, go back a couple of months ago because Caleb used to be in a cult with his entire family. But I mean, you do know they have like stores with Bibles where you can get like your name on it and stuff like that. So guys, we're going to be putting a GoFundMe together so that we can get Caleb his own Bible with his name on it. We can certainly make that happen. But we're digging into Proverbs 1 today. So we are going to announce a little bit later, but we're going to do a couple of different Proverbs, and then we got something big and special for you guys that which we'll announce next week on the show. But we're going to do Proverbs 1 today. And the thing that's interesting about the Proverbs, guys, is not only could you just like flip through Proverbs and just stop your finger on one chapter, you can kind of do that with one verse inside of the Proverbs. And so it's different than if you're reading a gospel or a prophet or something like that. And so I don't know how Proverbs was treated as you guys were growing up, because again, I didn't grow up in the church, but Proverbs was always like if you just hate reading the Bible or if you've never read it before, it's like read John or read Proverbs. And so I don't know, it seems more profound than that, but it does seem like kind of an easy place to land for the Bible.
Yeah, one of the things that I took away from this as I was studying it is, as I read this, I was like, well, are these promises or what? And as I found out, God's character is what gives us his, promises. But the interesting thing about Proverbs is it kind of deals more with probabilities. It's if you behave this way, then this is likely to happen, but that's not always. But growing up, this was treated kind of, to be quite honest, we didn't read it a whole lot, but it was, as you said, it's like just open it up and put your finger in and pick something, because it's almost all applicable. Very, very practical.
I agree. But I think it's very easy to read. And like you said, you could literally just open up and point to one and you're going to get something out of that. But as I was preparing for this, I really like what Charles Spurgeon says about the Proverbs. And he says, to sum up what he thinks about it, he says, listen to the wise words of Solomon, one of the wisest men to ever live. And he says, they are not merely jewels from earthly mines, but they are also precious treasures from the heavenly hills, so that the advice we have here is not only the counsel of a wise man, but the advice of the incarnate wisdom who speaks to us out of the word of God. And I just thought that was like, this isn't just Solomon talking to us. This is God saying, here are things to keep in mind. Here is some advice for you to take with you always.
Well, and you mentioned the word wisdom. This is in the wisdom literature section. So you got Proverbs, then you have Job, you have Ecclesiastes, you have Song of Solomon. And the thing that I have to remind myself, because to be frank, before I started preparing for this episode, I didn't know what the word Proverbs meant. I didn't know it was like, so to be like, or wisdom in a nutshell. Mm-hmm. But that's kind of what this is, to that point I was making from the beginning. Whether you do it a chapter at a time or a verse at a time, it's wisdom in a nutshell. And one singular verse, there's one here coming up in this first section, that it's like, you can spend a week just thinking about that and trying to figure that out. And when you get into the dating of Proverbs and, the first 24 chapters, we're looking at like almost 1000 BC, okay, roughly. And then again, because some people are like, Solomon wrote it all, but others are like, King Hezekiah's men kind of gathered them all, the wise people, there were the oracles, there were some Lemuel, I think, was another one. Like, we don't exactly know all of these, but we're looking at somewhere between 2,500 and 3,000 years ago. And I didn't read anything in the preparation for this section where I was like, that's not really timely to me today in 2023.
Oh, right. Yeah.
I mean, how many times have we mentioned on the forging table, it's like, we're just like these people. We're just as dumb, and we have 2,000 years more of technology. It simply just doesn't matter. But let's go and dig into Proverbs 1. And we're just going to take the person with the silkiest, smoothest voice. And Matt, you're right across from me. Try to keep your mustache off the microphone, though, because it creates a little friction. If you can read 1 through 7, verses 1 through 7 of Proverbs 1.
You got it. The Proverbs of Solomon, son of David, king of Israel, to know wisdom and instruction, to understand words of insight, to receive instruction in wise dealing, in righteousness, justice, and equity, to give prudence to the simple, knowledge and discretion to the youth. Let the wise hear and increase in learning, and the one who understands obtain guidance, to understand a proverb and saying, the words of the wise and their riddles. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction.
Okay, there's a whole lot there, but I want to kick us off by talking about verse 5. So let the wise hear and increase in learning, and the one who understands obtain guidance. And then it goes on from there into verse 6. But I guess the thing that I wrote down as I was writing in my nifty note Bible, being wise doesn't mean that you've arrived. And so if you're wise, because I think all of us have been around somebody that's wise, that we would consider to be wise regardless of their age, but they have capacity for more wisdom. Like, it's not I guess it's not really a destination. You know, Browning, you and I were talking at church today about, you know, our fastest miles we've ever ran or something like that. And so if you attain a certain time, that doesn't mean your capacity for running is now complete. Like, there's more there. You may not be able to get any faster. You may have ran as fast as your legs will ever carry you, but you have more capacity for that. So that was the first thing I thought of, to where it's like, never stop trying to attain wisdom.
That's the same thing I wrote. The need for learning never fades is what I wrote there. That's so true. We should always be seeking knowledge and understanding and wisdom.
Yeah, and like at work, you know, one of the things that I really like about my job is I get to interact with people consistently. And so people think, well, does this get boring after a while? I'm like, no, it didn't get boring after a while, because I approach everybody that I work with as an opportunity to learn something. I was like, you know, everybody's different. Some people are kind of odd, but I feel like I can learn something from everyone. So I take that into my workplace. And I think the Bible, it's the same way. We should go into the Bible. It's not a book that we should read once and put away. Maybe we read it again 5 or 10 years later. It's something that has something practical every single day, for every single day of your life, forever, right? And something that can grow you in wisdom.
Something I thought about whenever you said that is, I remember the first time I read How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. Guys, it's on our 100 books every modern Christian man should read list. It's on our website. It's Undaunted.Life /book list. But even in the intro of that book, they say, hey, you need to dust this off and read it once a year. And I'm going to be honest with you, if you're a big reader, do that. Like, it's got such practical wisdom. But your point is spot on, to where it's like, it's not like everyday wisdom and in every setting wisdom. It may be in your business wisdom, maybe a little bit in your family wisdom. Maybe you could take some of that to church or your Sunday school or something. But there is wisdom in the Bible to be found, and you don't have to search hard for it. Because I think some people, they look at the thickness of a Bible and they're like, oh man, I just don't even know where to start. It's like, you could literally start by flipping through it and just putting your finger down. Like, you may land on something random, but at the same time, there's wisdom to be gleaned from all those different situations.
And that's probably why, like, you've got Bible plans that have, you know, a reading from the Old Testament, New Testament, and then either Psalms or Proverbs, right? So you're getting a little bit of everything because they know it's so practical.
When I think of wisdom also, I think of it comes with a couple things. And one of those is, like, typically if you think of the person that you may think of as wise, it usually is not an arrogant person. Yeah. And I think, like, if you look at that verse 5 right there, is that they'll hear and increase in learning. And we know that people who are arrogant don't want to listen, right? And they think they already know everything. So, I mean, I think it comes with humility as well. And that's just kind of one of the things that stands out to me about wisdom and kind of the precursor to it, something that comes along with.
Yeah. I read a book, Good to Great, forever ago. But I remember, you know, they were interviewing these CEOs at companies that had done very, very well forever. And one of the things that they had asked them is just, you know, what it was that they did that made it happen. And they said that the consistent theme with all these CEOs and owners was that they were very humble. Like, they didn't be like, yeah, I did this, I did that. No, it's kind of like I was there at the right time at the right place, and just it worked out.
Right. And I know we'll get to it in verse 7. That's what I want to hear from you guys about too, is just what you think of that. But it's also, you've heard, maybe, I don't know where it comes from, but like the first step to being wise is admitting that you're not wise.
Right.
And that is kind of the understanding that you don't understand everything.
Well,
right?
let's go there now. Yeah, let's go there now, because I think I described it this way, where every time I find a new subject matter, whether it's because of a book I'm reading or I get a new injury. Eric is the guy that every time I break or hurt something, he's the one to put it back together and fix it. But it's like there's an entire world that you didn't even know existed. And then you find this world and it's like, wait a minute, 10,000 people in the world have a PhD in this subject that I didn't know existed 24 hours ago. And so the more you learn, the more you realize how ignorant you are. But then you have so many guys, Caleb, that are, to your point, walking through life thinking, I got my job figured out. Like I got my golf swing figured out. I got these things figured out. Like I got it going on. I'm smart. And it's like, you're not turning over enough rocks. But when we go back to verse 7, it really is the hinge point of this entire chapter. And because even if you go to the ESV, even before verse 1, it says the beginning of knowledge as like the section header. But the fear of the Lord is the beginning or the foundation of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. And I want you to keep fools in mind when we get over to verses 20, 21, and 22. But the whole time I'm reading that, it's not going to be a shock to anybody. I mentioned this book a lot, but my buddy Matty Montgomery, pastor out of Tennessee, wrote a book called Scary God. And you hear these quotes before, I forget who said it, but they said it recently. It's like, we're not scared of God. We're not afraid of God anymore. Like we're afraid of the devil. I think it was Jim Caviezel, whenever he was on the Sean Ryan show. That's what it was. But he goes like, we're so scared of the devil and we don't realize that God is infinitely more powerful than the devil. Why are we so scared of the darkness? Like we should be scared of the light that God brings, because when you're in God's presence, you can't even stand the light. That's why you can't stand in God's presence. And so, verse 7, highlight that, star that, but there's so much there, but just the fear of the Lord is something where I think goes back to what I talk about all the time. When a pastor never talks about the Lion of Judah, you're not really going to have a proper fear of the Lord. When the pastor only talks about grace and never talks about judgment or truth, it's really going to put you in a place where you're not in a right ordering of God. God is not your boyfriend. He's not your buddy. And he's not your homeboy. Like he is the God creator of the universe that would not even have to move to obliterate your entire family tree. We just don't treat it that way. You know what I mean?
I think verse 7 expands beyond that too. Like that could be a theme of almost all of Proverbs just in general. And if you were to pick out a life verse that you could pick worse than Proverbs 1 verse 7. But I look at that and see the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. And then the opposite of that, fools despise wisdom and instruction. A little bit of homework for people who are listening or watching. Like if you have a concordance Bible or a Bible concordance, I wonder how many times in the book of Proverbs the word wise or wisdom or fool and foolish is used in contrast to each other. And the reason I bring that up is because I think God is very specific in how he talks about that, and his language is precise because he's also talking about salvation here. I think you can find salvation even in Proverbs, and I love to look for that because there's basically two camps of people. There's people who are given up to wrath, and then there's people who are covered in Christ's righteousness, right? God would say the people that are covered in Christ's righteousness are the wise who are seeking after God. And if you're seeking after God, you are seeking after the right and true knowledge. If you are foolish, God gives you up, Romans 1. God gives you up. You are foolish. You are set for destruction if you remain foolish.
And keep that in mind when we get to the very end of Proverbs 1, because that has a direct correlation to Romans 1.
Yeah.
And you notice how black and white it is. It's either you're wise or you're a fool. There's no middle ground. Right. We know in Revelation how God said, I wish you had been hot or cold, but you're neither. You're lukewarm. So I'm going to spit you out of my mouth.
And I think, go ahead.
I was going to say that, I feel like if I'm being honest, I have more questions than answers when it comes to verse 7. Just on
well, we have tons of answers over here, so just ask us, man. Come on.
That's why I'm in the right place.
Okay.
Welcome. So, you hear fear and you think of it, like I've heard it described as like is it fearing a tyrant? Is it more like standing in awe of something that you know is powerful? what is something in between? I mean, I feel like in my spirit, I know what it means to fear the Lord, but to articulate it, it's difficult.
Well, I'll give an answer, but as we established before we started recording today, I'll say something that sounds smart, and then Matt is going to probably hop in and say something that sounds smarter. But hey guys, just kind of follow along. Eventually, we'll just kind of phase me out of my own show. It's okay.
Gosh. Never. That could never happen.
This is what came to mind as you described that, Caleb. Like when you're a little boy, because I have a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old, and James, my 3-year-old, has just now discovered muscles, and he's like, I want muscles, and I make him flex all the time. And if he gets hurt, it's like, hey, show me your muscles, show me how tough you are. And he'll go to my gym and he'll try to pick up my dumbbells, and they're adjustable, so I'll adjust it down to 10 pounds, and so he can lift it up. But then I'll throw it all the way to the heaviest setting, and he can't do it, and the dad just lifts it up, no big deal. He's like, oh my gosh, Dad. So when I think of fear, I think James isn't there yet because he's 3, but one day he will have a healthy reverence for Dad's strength, because he's going to realize the difference between mine and his and what that could do to him. So he's not scared because he thinks Dad's going to use that strength on him to hurt him, but it's like, wow, like the force. Like I remember if you watch people go on safari or whatever, some of my favorite videos to watch are when people are watching predations happen. But there's one in particular of a lion that I think was taking down an impala, and the impala is running unbelievably fast, but then the lion is running so much faster, and they literally collide right by one of these excursion vehicles, and it just the dirt that flies, and it's that power that you don't experience. It's like when you're field level at a high school football game with these freak beast kids. And it's like the power is so much different whenever you can kind of feel it, when you can see it and sense it. And so that's kind of where I go when I think about that, to where it's just like, I am me and he is God. And the chasm between our power and ability to control anything is so wide. And so that's where I kind of revert back to when I was 3 and thought about my daddy's muscles or something like that. But Matt, do you want to go ahead and hop in and say something better?
I don't know that
yeah, dude, should we give you a break? I mean, because Browning looks like he's got something.
I would love to say, I think of Exodus when, Pharaoh is telling Moses, I don't know who this God is. I know who these gods are. And I know who the gods of my nation is. And God literally sends plagues. And we're going through this in my Sunday school class. So this is just really fun to talk through. He sends plagues in direct contrast to humble and humiliate the Egyptian gods, and things that like turning water into blood. They have a river god that is supposed to control the river and bring life and bring freshness to their society. And God says, it's blood. You can't do anything with it. Turning their reliance on a God that's not real into nothing. And now it's like that God is humbled because I am the one true God. I'm the only one that exists. And that's why God says in Deuteronomy, the Shema Israel, Yahweh Eloheinu, Yahweh Ehad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. I'm it. And I'm going to humble those who are proud, who stand against that. And we should have that same fear and reverence and submission to the God of the universe, is where I kind of look at that verse there. It's just it's giving me goosebumps to even think and talk about it.
Well, Eric, when you give your feedback, just know if you do it in multi languages, it'll come off even better. So just throw out some ancient.
I'm already second best in this. Holy smokes.
Listen, if you're Crossway is a great resource, and I started to look at the Hebrew and the Greek, and they have a really good resource that gives you line by line what that is. And one of the things I wanted to learn was the Shema, because that's something that the Israelites would pray 2 times a day. And it's very, very powerful to learn those things that, God's ancient people were saying or are still saying today, and to understand, where that all comes from. So like, I'm not smart. I just love seeking knowledge, and that is just a really cool thing. So Crossway, also, if you're listening, send Caleb a Bible. That'd be cool.
Yeah, we'll provide that address in the show notes, guys. It's a desperate time in the Martin household. We need to just come together around this emergency that's going on. But Browning, what were you going to say?
Yeah, I'll try to be quick here. I mean, the verse I think about is, don't fear men who can kill the flesh. Fear God, who can kill both the flesh and the soul in hell. And I think about that in my natural unsaved state. That should be a very fearful thing. So I mean, we can look at creation, just the expansiveness of creation, and realize, gosh, there's no way I can go even like halfway. If I try to go, oh yeah, I would totally make this, I'd be like, wait a second. The only reason I know about that is because God created my brain to do that. So just even that is fearful. And then we'll add this one thing, it's a little bit outside the box, but I believe it was Moses, when he lied. Did he lie about his wife being a sister? Is that Moses? Abraham. Yeah, thank you. And whenever he was confronted about that, he said something like, I didn't think that the fear of the Lord was here. There's this kind of this idea that, if we just think about it from a social media standpoint, people put all their stuff out there these days, all their personal things on social media to people that, one, maybe don't care, or two, don't share the same, they're not in the same spot. So they're throwing their pearls at people that are going to trample them. And so I think that was what was going on there, is he was fearful, and it was bad. Shouldn't have done that, but he was fearful of the rulers because he didn't think that the fear of God was there and that something would befall them as a result of that.
Caleb, did we answer your questions?
Yeah, that's helpful. I did. I mean, when I was doing some research, there was a couple of things that I heard that I thought were helpful too. Was just that, when it comes to accountability, like we can have a great Bible study, we can have great conversations like this, we can have filters on our computer and things set up in such a way that we won't fall into sin, right? But until we actually have a healthy fear of the Lord, then nothing's going to change.
Yeah, I think you probably summed it up there just by saying healthy fear of the Lord. Because if you're so scared of God that you can't move, first of all, that's probably correct. But at the same time, like if you can't operate as a human, like that's probably not something that's going to be healthy for the people around you. It's going to stop you from sharing the gospel or anything like that. It's going to make people kind of freaked out by you. And so I think that that's a helpful thing to think about. There's certainly more that we could camp on that first section, but there's some other great stuff in Proverbs 1. Caleb, will you go ahead and read just 8 and 9 real quick? I just had a quick point on 8 and 9.
You bet. Listen, my son, to your father's instruction, and do not ignore your mother's teaching, for they are graceful wreath around your head and necklaces for your neck.
So when I was reading the Moody commentary on this, I thought that they made a great point that I'd never heard before. But Solomon intended to transmit his wisdom to the youth of Israel by putting his proverbs in the mouths of godly parents. And then one word came to mind, and that was catechism. Because if you're a godly parent and you're wanting to bestow godly wisdom on your child, you help catechize them. And I know I've used that word a lot, and some people I'll get emails like, hey, what's that word? What does that mean? And I'm like, here, let me Google for you and then tell you, because apparently like I'm the one that has to do that. But like ultimately it's like we catechize by accident, right? Mm-hmm. So Matt, your eldest son, will not be able to be a fan of any other soccer team than Manchester United, because it's just, and my boys will not support another baseball team other than the St. Louis Cardinals. We do that just by accident, because Dad doesn't have a bunch of different teams' hats. He has 30 of the same hat of the same team. And so we just kind of catechize them into that. The Cardinals are the best, the Red Devils are the best, the whoever's are the best. But when you're catechizing them in the ways of the Lord, you're helping them to understand deep theological context that is appropriate for their age. And so I thought that was so interesting, to where it's just like, okay, yeah, wisdom literature, we get it. It's like, no, what was Solomon's point for even putting these things down? Because they were probably already age-old wisdom during his day 3,000 years ago, 2,500 years ago, wherever, you get these coming together. But that's how you pass down wisdom, is by putting these proverbs, these wisdoms in a nutshell, in the minds and in the mouths of godly parents.
Well, these are set up in a way that you can remember them. They're set up in kind of a cadence to where you can recite them. And same as like what you would get with a catechism. We use the New City Catechism. It's great, but it's really set up to Like you can recite these pretty easily and you can hear one, but the idea is put it in your heart, memorize it, and look to Jesus's example. I mean, when he goes out into the desert, he's reciting. I mean, he uses Deuteronomy more than anything, but he's reciting scripture because he knows it. And when you're faced with a situation and your kids are faced with a situation, you can fall back on that. And so the idea that it's easy to read and easy to remember is important. And, you know, you look thousands of years ago, ancient people, they probably didn't have a bunch of books. Well, they didn't have a bunch of books laying around. So they had to memorize this stuff. They had to have this at the ready. When something happened, they could recite that and then boom, then they're in a better place.
Yeah. Now I'd add to that too. One of the things that has allowed me to have really good, important conversations with my kids has been taking some of the wisdom and sharing it alongside of some of my personal experiences. Now, some of them are embarrassing, and some of them, you know, I had the wisdom to not get into some problem where I had to, you know, confess sin or whatever. But the nice thing is that when we can learn this, we can memorize things and we can tell our kids about it. But it's also such a wonderful thing for a kid to be like, yeah, my dad had a similar situation and this is how he dealt with it using the word of God. Or my dad had this situation, he fell into sin over it, but he was redeemed out of it. And this is now what he's teaching me so that I don't fall into the same trap.
You could follow that path upward too, because the Bible's full of mistakers, right? To use a weird word, but like people who do bad things and God still puts them in his story. If he loves David so much that he is going to have the Messiah come through his line, and he does some pretty awful things. Like, how much does he love us as well to say, okay, yes, even though you did that, there's still grace, there's still love. Like, come to me, rest in me. And like, it's a great example for us. It's a great example for our kids. But yeah, I think adding our own personal struggles and stumbles is paramount, especially for our kids. Like, Trafford went through a phase where he thought I could do no wrong. And I had the same thing with my dad. Now, and I'll never forget the first time my dad messed up and I was shattered. Not because he wanted to set up that he was perfect, but I thought he was this perfect person who never did anything wrong. And that, you know, I think I've said this on the pod, or we've talked about this on the podcast before. Never meet your heroes because they'll disappoint you. And me and my wife have been very intentional about, okay, we want our kids to see us even when we do wrong things. And we want to be open about that because there's only one perfect person, and we are all redeemed by the same God, even though we do messed up stuff.
There's a word that comes to mind based on what the things y'all were saying, and that's replace. So if you go back to the book Manhood by Josh Hawley, he was on the show a couple months back, Senator Josh Hawley from Missouri. In his section where he talks about being a father, he talks about a good father replaces himself. In our current culture, when do we replace something? We replace something because the something we have now is broken, or the something we could get as a replacement is significantly better. And so if you are a father and you are replacing yourself, you are hopefully replacing yourself with an upgrade. So I want my sons to be a significantly better version of a man than me. And I'm trying to set the bar as high as humanly possible, right? Or high as spiritually possible.
Yeah, and I just love John Tyson's description of how he gets that done. I love this little step by step. He says when we approach something new, we'll do you watch and I do, and then we'll talk. And then it's I'll do, you help, and then we'll talk. Then it's you do, I'll help, we talk, and then eventually it's you just do, and then we'll talk about it. But the next time it's all on you. I love that. How that it's transferred on step by step, very intentional. I think that's very practical.
And there's so much more. And like, I'm looking at the clock and it's like, here's Proverbs for you, because it's like, we're not even close to halfway to where I wanted to get to, but that there's a whole lot of great stuff there. But I wanted to camp out on, well, just real quick, 15 and 16. Brownie, would you read 15 and 16 just real quick?
Sure. My son, do not walk in the way with them. Hold back your foot from their paths, for their feet run to evil and they make haste to shed blood.
So this is kind of like me lecturing people about smoking, but this section to me is like, if you run with idiots that love to get in fights and kind of have this bloodlust for drama and that type of thing, and for the ladies listening, these women that are just, they suck the life out of you with the drama that they create around them, avoid those people like the plague. Like, I literally talked, my voice coach, right, who's helping me rebuild my voice. He's a huge human being. And he's like, yeah, I've only been in a couple of fights. And it was because of my idiot friends, right? Because his idiot friends are like, hey, we got our big friend with us, so let's start mouthing off at the bar. Why? Because we got our big friend with us. It's like, those are guys that get you shanked, right?
It's always the smallest guys too.
God, yeah, they're just the ones like, yeah, look at me now. And then they're always hiding behind the big guy's shoulder or under his armpit or something like that. So that's just kind of basic wisdom. At this point, if you're still running with morons that get in fights, stop running with those morons. But Browning, if you wouldn't mind, read 20, 21, and 22. There's some really good stuff here.
Wisdom cries aloud in the street. In the markets, she raises her voice. At the head of the noisy streets, she cries out. At the entrance of the city gates, she speaks. How long, O simple ones, will you love being simple? How long will scoffers delight in their scoffing and fools hate knowledge?
So there's a lot here. So first of all, correct me if I'm wrong, because in my research, there was no tremendous significance to the personification of the female pronouns here, the use of she.
It's like giving a name to your boat.
Right. It's like the personification of wisdom, like kind of a thing. And so if anyone has a problem with that, send me an email and I won't read it. But like the thing that's so funny is the beginning of verse 22. How long, O simple ones, will you love being simple? And I immediately wrote in my margins, my translation is, how much longer are you going to love being dumb? And that's kind of the thing. But this, just since I've been studying this, guys, it has helped me to put people into categories, which I know is dangerous, but guys, follow me as you're listening to this, because it provides 3 categories that people can fall into: the simple, the scoffers, and the fools.
Yeah.
And so these are loose definitions here, and y'all feel free to add to it. But the simple, those are people that are naive. They're very, very ignorant. They don't know any better, would probably be how we would describe the simple people. Then you have the scoffers. They love to mock. They love to criticize. They'll commit serious acts, they're very arrogant about their critiques, right? Then you have the fools. The fools do know better. They know better, but they're smug. They're thick-headed. They're opposed to God's covenant, and they become unteachable. Of all these categories, whenever you talk about it's just pearls before swine, you get there with fools the quickest. Because I've said this a lot, and then I'd love to hear you guys jump in. There's one question you can ask somebody at the beginning of a debate or the beginning of an argument that will save you a lot of time and energy, and it's, hey, if you were wrong about this, would you want to know? Would you want me to let you know that you were wrong?
That's very
Because
true.
If someone were like, well, yeah, like if I was presenting myself in a factually inaccurate way, I would love to know that. That's a great person to have a conversation with. But if they're like, well, I'm not wrong, so what a stupid thing to even suggest, like, who are you? Change the subject immediately or just walk away. But again, when you're looking at people in your life that you struggle with, maybe even people you share a house with, there are 3 categories of people. Like, they're simple, scoffers, and fools. And then those are the negative categories, I guess I should say. There are positive categories, but those difficult people in your life, you can more easily deal with them when you appropriately label them. So I tried to express that as diplomatically as possible, but there you go.
I think what gives you those categories too is what I love about this section we just read was that wisdom is not hidden. It's not a secret. Like it's right there in front of you.
Right.
My brother-in-law talks about how he's like, I'm not a conspiracy theorist. It's obvious theorist. And it's real similar, right? I mean, it's
there you go.
It's right in front of you. Just humble yourself and seek the knowledge. Like your point, like be open to being wrong every now and then. I love that about these 3 verses right here.
Wisdom has nothing to hide because it's true.
Right.
And it's available to anyone and everyone. Whereas deceit and darkness, like it wants to operate in secret. And wisdom is not something that you ever have to be ashamed of. And to your point about the fool or the simple scoffers and I wrote down simple scoffers and fools. It's a path of downward progression. And I mean, I know we're going to get there as we get to the end, but the fools who are just so sure. And again, there's another.
Is there anything more annoying than a dumb person that is super sure of themselves? Like, let's just, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
like,
for sure.
They're so sure, but they're so dumb. It's like, help me.
Yeah, I think that's a very hard thing to deal with, because I think our flesh wants to just be angry and annoyed. But I mean, we should pray for them. We should pray that God would not harden their heart as he would do to Pharaoh, but that they would be opened up, not by anything that we would do. Because like, I think sometimes we make it our mission to make people understand and come to our side of the table, whether it's someone like an unbeliever. Like in my commentary, it talks about the fool as being an unbeliever who has completely denounced God and biblical wisdom. And we should pray for those people, because God can do things.
He can impart his wisdom to them.
But we shouldn't hold ourselves accountable to people who don't want to hear wisdom and truth.
Yeah. And I actually think that it's almost more frustrating for the simpleton to deal with simpletons. What I look at, or how I would define those folks, are the people that will go and they'll receive things, but they're not willing to put any effort in. So it's like, I'll go to church and I'll listen to my pastor preach, but then I'm not going to go home. I'm not going to check, on what he said to see if it was true or not. I'm just going to accept it. But also, I may not even consider how that could be remotely applicable to my life. I'm just going to say I did it. I went to church, and you asked me 2 days later what he talked about. I'm probably not going to remember.
Well, and also, and I wrote this in my notes, a simple person is easily misled, because it's easy to sit in our chair and to watch a documentary about a cult that came together in the 60s and watch what these people are doing and being like, how did you think that this guy that you handed your wives over to on a nightly basis, like this is the second coming? Like, this is the guy? But I wrote this down. I heard this and I haven't been able to substantiate it, so I'll just be vague. But it was the statistic that a sizable percentage of the population of the world has no internal dialogue, meaning they're not sitting there at night before they fall asleep. Yeah, I'm looking at your face, Matt. Yes. So I need to substantiate this, and maybe I can do it during the break.
I can help you with that.
Okay, thank you. But they have no internal dialogue. They're not running through the scenarios of that day. So for instance, let's make it simple. So when I get home from jiu-jitsu, right, whether I do well or do poorly or somewhere in the middle, before I fall asleep, I am rerunning all of the positions I was in, the things I should have done, the things I did that were good, so I can reinforce that. And then I think about, oh man, I can't believe I misspoke when I was on the podcast, or crap, I thought I was going to read 2 chapters a day and I read half of one. It's just internal dialogue. Yeah. And that's why it's hard to shut off. There are people walking around that have none of that.
No,
it's just not.
That's hard for me.
You
to
sound
fathom.
skeptical.
It's hard for me to fathom.
No,
that.
let Browning hop in.
Listen, it's not hard. It's not hard. It's because our society has made it so difficult for us to slow down. We have no solitude. What do we do? Well, I mean, like what's the average length of a conversation? It takes, I think, somewhere between 7 or 8 minutes to go from surface level to even medium level. But most conversations stop before it gets to the 7 minute, and it's one of a number of things. There's like a 2 or 3 second lull, and then what do? You pick up your phone and you start looking at your phone. You have no chance. What do you do the last 10 or 15 minutes before you go to bed? Now, I'm not saying it's you, but many people are watching, they're vegging out watching TV, or they're playing their Candy Crush or whatever, and then all of a sudden they're dozing, and so they lay it down.
Man, that's interesting. I guess it makes sense. When I go to bed, a lot of times I'll listen to a sermon by Alistair Begg or Sinclair Ferguson, because they're Scottish and I'm listening to them preach the word of God. It's very good. But I guess that makes sense. Like when you're doing classes for social media, like, or people are teaching how to run a successful social media, they teach you 7 seconds to 21 seconds. If you go any longer than 21 seconds on a video,
they're gone.
You're losing people. And so, like, I guess to your point, that makes sense that, like, I don't have very long.
I think you've softened my point a little bit, because my point is that even when they're not distracted, they could be sitting in a meadow.
You just think they're idiots.
What I'm saying is, like,
nothing there.
Well, it's like when you've heard the expression, the lights are on, but no one's home. It's kind of like that. They could be sitting in the middle of a meadow on a tree stump with no iPod iPod. What year did I just go back to on this podcast? But they have no iPhone. They've got no, Bluetooth speaker, nothing. And they're just sitting there just thinking about nothing. They're looking at, oh, there's a bird. Oh, the sky's blue, I think. Like, so it's just, we can't always assume people are chewing on things as
They're
deeply
not.
as we might be.
I mean, when you first said it, that was my thought, was like, there's no room anymore because it's all external dialogue, right?
Yeah.
They're being they're consuming something all the time.
Constantly bombarded. But anyway, so I think that's helpful when you can categorize people in your life. It's like, okay, this person is simple, but Matt, I think you made the most mature point at the table, which is basically like, that doesn't mean you should write that person off. They're missing something that you likely can't put there for them. But if there's a corrective action that you can take, softly asking them, hey, if you were wrong about, before the baby's born, it's not even alive. Okay, hey, if you were wrong about that thing that you just said, if that were not factual, would you want to know? Well, no, I obviously know I'm right. Like, it's just a blob. It's just a meh. Well, that's a person that's probably not, like, their sponge is completely saturated at that point. They can't take in anything else. But if they show even a modicum of openness to being wrong, not only does that go back to humility, but it's a good indication that there's probably some fruit there that you can help with.
Well, I think like extra biblical sources are very good in this way. Greg Koukl's tactics it comes to mind. Like, ask a question, put the rock in the shoe. Like, in going to 1 Corinthians, like, love is not proud, love does not boast. So like, we're not to beat people over the head with love or truth, but we can ask questions and love them that way. So, like, to your point, like, let's love in the way we should, and maybe it is a question, but sometimes it's just okay. Yeah, I can't have an argument with you.
I got to move on with my day before this goes crazy. I want to move on to verse 26 and 27. And Browning, I want you to read. I know you just read some, but when in our group text before this one, you literally sent these two verses to me, and you're like, I bet this is going to be Kyle's favorite part of Proverbs 1. And the funny thing about it is, as you can see, I didn't write any notes. There was no highlights on that section. And so I read it, I remembered it, but it wasn't like, oh my gosh, we definitely got to talk about that. But apparently Eric Browning thinks that that's going to be where I would kind of go to. So you get to read 26 and 27, and then I will get to defend myself.
I also will laugh at your calamity. I will mock when terror strikes you. When terror strikes you like a storm, and your calamity comes like a whirlwind, when distress and anguish come upon you.
So this is, again, the personification of wisdom speaking here. And I will say, after you sent that message to me, I went back and reread it. Oh, and I giggled. And I was just kind of like, because there is a healthy part of me that when somebody reaps exactly what they sow, I'm just like, F around and find out. Is kind of one of those things where it's like, and there's a Bill Burr joke in there somewhere where he's talking about someone that gets bit by a rattlesnake. And it's like, wait, can we not ask questions? It's like, were you messing with it? Like, what were like, we just assumed this, this rattlesnake fell out of the sky and attacked this person. Like, no, there's more to this story than that. And so anyway, that was kind of like my defense. Like, I definitely read it, but then I went back and it's like, that is interesting that the female personification of wisdom, as written by the most wisdom-filled person ever, it's like, almost like, well, let me ask you, does this give us permission to even like internally snicker when somebody gets exactly the fruits of what their pre-actions would have, led to? What do you think?
I think that's a dangerous place to be. I think we can revel in God's glory and God saying, vengeance is mine. And in a real sense, the wrath of God is continuously poured out. And, we talked about Romans 1, and this is what I wrote in mine is this is very much a Romans 1 situation. But yeah, I think that's a dangerous place to be. I don't think we should be cheerful because of that person. I think we should celebrate that God's truth is God's truth no matter what. But again, that's a tricky place to be. Like, you shouldn't go, yeah, but not against you. Just I'm celebrating God. It's like, yeah, you probably shouldn't say that to people.
Well, I mean, I've had, you can tell me if I was wrong, but I had a friend that was just hell bent on doing and just sinning, and he was a roommate of mine, and I had to deal with it. But I had compassion for him. Like, I really wanted him to figure it out. But I remember like struggling with my prayers for him, because I would pray for him. But I was like, gosh, Lord, get his attention. Do whatever is necessary. It felt like he needed to be smacked in the face by God. And I don't know that the end result, I wasn't looking to go, so I can laugh at him and be like, told you so, or whatever. But it was, he needed some kind of, slap in the face, to get his attention.
I think it's just like being a parent, right? Like you tell your kid something and they don't listen, and then something happens, and you're not celebrating that something bad happened to your kid. But most of the time, at least in my fatherhood journey, when something happens to Trafford, because he's 8, Holland's 3, so it's not like, he's had more experience to do this stuff. You can see that look on their face where they're like, oh, that's why dad or mom said, don't do this. And I did. And now I'm having this external punishment. And here I am.
And I'm sure you've laughed.
Right.
Yeah.
So Caleb, earlier in this conversation, you talked about, the most wisdom-filled people being the most humble. One of the most humble men that I know, Dr. Dwight Adams, he's about to be inducted in the Oklahoma Hall of Fame. He is the scientist that first testified in court using DNA evidence. Like, he and his team at the FBI figured that process out. So he's from Edmond, a good buddy of mine. Well, his wife was talking to my wife about just wisdom, being married so long, like what are some things to remember? And her answer was, sometimes you just gotta laugh. And so it's like, when you have a kid that you've told, hey, don't touch that, that's hot. Hey, don't touch that, it's super hot. Hey, if you touch that, it's going to burn you. Hey, remember that thing over there? It's super hot. And then they go over there and touch it like a moron. Like, you could chastise them and you could freak out and you can do all that, or you can just laugh and be like, hey man, natural consequences.
Bet you're never going to do that again.
Right.
If only you knew, if only when someone had told you.
Right. Yeah. If only, you just go completely into sarcastic mode.
Something to you there.
So Matt, if you wouldn't mind reading as we kind of get towards the end here, 28 through 33, because this goes back into the discussion you were talking about earlier about Romans 1. There's a lot here, and it kind of puts, verses 26 and 27 in a little bit of a different light. So just read 28 through the end there.
Yeah, this is good. Then they call upon me, but I will not answer. They will seek me diligently, but will not find me, because they hated knowledge and did not choose the fear of the Lord. Would have none of my counsel and despised all of my reproof. Therefore they shall eat the fruit of their way and have their fill of their own devices. For the simple are killed by their turning away, and the complacency of fools destroys them. But whoever listens to me will dwell secure and will be at ease without dread of disaster.
Therefore they shall eat the fruit of their way and have their fill of their own devices. So I'm reminded of a quote by C.S. Lewis where he was basically describing what hell is. And people would say, kind of a natural objection. Excuse me. People would say, why would a good God send, someone to hell? And C.S. Lewis would be like, well, he didn't do that. He gave these people exactly what they wanted. They wanted a life completely devoid of God. And he said, thy will be done. Right? And so it's like, that's the wages of sin, right? When you get into verses 28 through 33, those are the wages. And it's helped me think about that more easily in an apologetics context. How could a good God possibly do that? Before I even get to what does good mean? What's the difference between good and evil? What's the moral law with which to differentiate between the two? Before you even get there, it's like God is allowing you to have what you want. Matt, you mentioned the hardening of Pharaoh's heart earlier. Forever, I thought God hardened his heart, where he's like, God made Pharaoh act that way. It was the wrong, way of understanding that. God took how Pharaoh was already acting and solidified it and said, you got it, buddy. This is how you want to act, and this is how you want to put yourself in reference to me. Great. I'm going to go ahead and set that in concrete.
Yeah. No, I think, and we could probably spend like hours talking about this, but this is why I love going to the Sunday school class that I go to, because I have teachers or a teacher that just, it goes so much into detail.
Shout out Terry Fakes.
Terry Fakes, he's amazing. But even the guys he's put into place to come sub for him, and there's some amazing people that teach the word to our class. We were learning about, we're learning about the plagues, and the hardening of Pharaoh's heart is something, and we shouldn't miss the details that God puts into his story. when the pharaohs die, the custom was that at their final judgment would, before they got to go on to their final glory, was their heart would be removed and it would be weighed. If it's light, you get to go through. If it's not, if it weighs down the scale, they're obliterated. They're done. And so the hardening of the heart was to say, your heart is hard. It is hard as stone. It will weigh down the scales, even in what you think you have to do. It like the attention to detail that God puts in there. I can't explain that the way that Terry Fakes would explain that, but it's a really, really cool way to think. Like God even uses like what they would know is what their Pharaoh would go through is his heart light, or does it weigh down the scales? And so he was weighing his own heart down to where in his religion, when he got to that final judgment, his heart would be like a rock and it would be weighed, and he would receive the consequence for what he actually wanted. That's a very interesting place to be. But I wanted to make another point. This reminds me of Psalm 2. It ends the same way Psalm 2 ends. Now, therefore, O kings, be wise. Be warned, O rulers of the earth. Serve the Lord with fear and rejoice with trembling. Kiss the Son, lest he be angry, and you perish in the way, for his wrath is quickly kindled. And then it ends with, blessed are all who take refuge in him. And that just
very, very similar.
Very similar.
I think this also, these last 8 verses just breaks your heart, in my opinion, I feel like it's just a microcosm of the distortion of the truth that we see right now. Just with the way that everything is just it's all relative, it's just distorted. And it breaks your heart to see that this is how it's going to end. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. And if you go back to like 23, I know we skipped over it, but it says, if you will turn at my reproof, behold, I will pour out my spirit to you. I will make my words known to you. Right. So there was still hope. This is even after Lady Wisdom's like, come on, guys. You listening or not, but you're right. And so I was just thinking too, it's like everybody has a bottom. Like what is some people go rock bottom and some people have shallow bottoms. And so I think, praying for my kids, I know that they're going to go through trials. I know they're going to mess up. I want their bottom to be shallow though. I want them to go, if they're going to go do something, be like, well, I'm never doing that again. And then get straight with the Lord on that and never, continue down that path, but there are these people that hit rock bottom. And unfortunately rock bottom is not the deepest, bottom you can have. The hell is. And so you hear a lot of people that have hit rock bottom and then they kind of drug themselves out or been lifted out by the Lord. There's a lot of testimony from that. And I know Matt Chandler, I was listening to something from him recently. He's like, I praise the Lord that none of my kids have these crazy testimonies. Like, why should they have to have these crazy testimonies of them hitting some rock bottom? You don't need to have that in order to have a testimony. So
I think that's a great point, because a lot of people will diminish their own story because they grew up in a Christian family and the worst thing they ever did was steal a piece of bubble gum and that type of thing. You can still understand the depravity of your life, and you haven't had to like trip and fall and land on some random stranger's penis, like to be like, oh, well, that's a different level of depravity. Sorry. Is that a little, is that too much?
I did not expect that.
Well, I was not expecting that at all.
Hey guys, expect the unexpected.
Some people trip and fall, some people trip and fall in different ways.
Right? See, yeah, there's scraping your knees, and anyway, we can leave that there.
Internal dialogue tonight. It's going to be, why did I
Well, the good thing about the edit of this is it's in black and white, so you can't see that I'm blushing, but I can feel that I'm blushing at this exact moment. Now,
I'm
Matt,
blushing for you.
Yeah. Well, Matt, I do have a question on this. And if this is going to take too long to unpack, because we're here right at the end, but I wrote a note on verse 31. Therefore they say, eat the fruits of their way and have their fill of their own devices. How does this correlate with election? Right. And because election is like, okay, who's going to be chosen to be written in the Lamb's Book of Life? He chose them before time. Because in verse 31, the very first thing I wrote down was, this is not God's fault that you acted this way. But then I was like, where does election come in? And guys, if you're slow in the uptick here, Matt is he's the resident Calvinist at the table today. And so as I'm trying to like work through that philosophy or that theology, I'm like, okay, how does this relate to our decision to go left or go right, or our decision to act in a way that we know is wrong, or to avoid acting in that way? If that's too big to unpack.
No, we probably could talk about this forever. So I think it's important to establish some definition. So election isn't just God saying, Caleb, you're in, no matter what you do.
Congrats.
It's a call to our heart. It is a revealing. It is an opening of our eyes. It is a direct confrontation of the truth. God is the one that turns our heart. He's the one that pulls on us. He draws us to him. It is still our responsibility to act in accordance. And again, I will say this till the day I die and I go home to see the Lord. Like, this is one of those twin truths, the pillars of twin truths, that God elects, but we are responsible for our own actions. And so God reveals himself or reveals the truth to us. We are still to answer that call. And we can not. I mean, Romans 1 is a great example of God giving us up to our own passions. Pharaoh is a perfect example. He had the truth revealed to him. He had his firstborn son taken from him. Yet he still hardened his heart and did not turn to the Lord. So God said, okay, I'm going to give you up to destruction.
It goes back to, okay, it's, all right, your will be done. That's God telling us your will be done. So there's certainly more that we could talk about there. But guys, how much did we skip over in Proverbs 1? And we still filled up an hour, but we got to move on. But guys, come back here next Sunday where we are going to dig into Proverbs 23. So make sure that you are ready to go to talk about Proverbs 23. But before we let you go, we are going to do a quick resilience boost. At Undaunted.Life, our mission is equipping men to push back darkness with content that forges spiritual, mental, and physical resilience. If you're wondering how we can even pull off something like the Forging Table, it's because we have donors. We have guys just like you that love to support content that is going to be good for you and the whole family. So guys, hop on board and become a monthly donor. Thank you guys so much for listening to this episode. Wherever you're listening to this, please subscribe, rate, and leave us a positive 5-star review. If you want me to come speak live at your event or on your podcast, just shoot me an email to info@Undaunted.Life. That's info@Undaunted.Life. Follow us on Instagram and like us on Facebook, and check out our website for everything else, including how to donate to keep more content like this coming your way. Just go to www.Undaunted.Life. And also, we want to thank the band Holy Name for allowing us to use their music for our content. The music on this podcast is their song Perpetua, which is off their self-titled debut album on Face Down Records. The links are in the description. I'm your host, Kyle Thompson. Remember, keep pushing back darkness, keep forging spiritual, mental, and physical resilience, keep seeking the Lion of Judah.